everyone, and welcome to my podcast, Today is Not Tomorrow. Here with me, I have a spectacular guest, the founder of the Buzzcut Post, the Female Quotient Next Gen Advisor, and the Student Affairs Co-Director of Gauchos for Transparency, Rebecca Fairweather. Hi Rebecca, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm well. I'm really excited for this talk.
Me too.
Perfect. Let's jump right in, shall we? Rebecca, where are you from? And please tell us more about the wonderful work you do for these organisations.
So I am originally from New York. I'm born and bred from Queens, New York. And I'm currently here right now. I'm supposed to be going to college, but I'm stuck in New York. But being in New York has definitely allowed me to be more exposed to a lot of events that are happening, as well as a diversity of people and thoughts. And so that exposure has led me to fall in love with advocacy, and it's given me the privilege of having a lot of opportunities be right at my front door.
I think this is amazing. You've certainly grasped the opportunities that have come your way and made the most of them. If it's okay with you, Rebecca, I'd love if we could jump back a couple of years. So before you first entered high school, what were you like back then? What was going on?
So I was a very shy kid, surprisingly enough, especially throughout middle school. I was experiencing quite a few hardships throughout middle school. My father had previously had a heart attack and stroke, and we were going through the recession of 2008, so he lost his job due to both. So, we were going through a lot of financial struggles, and my mom was the breadwinner of the house, but she was working, a minimum wage job. So it's difficult to support 3 people in a household. So we found out that we were getting evicted, and, I was already going through quite a few hardships. I was being bullied at school. I was, going through this self-discovery period of my life. So I didn't really want to burden them with any of my issues. So I sort of took on the role of, being my own therapist. And, as many people who have probably gone through depression and anxiety, it's not the best thing to experience these things by yourself. So I went through a very dark period of time for about a year and a half. I was doing things such as like self-harm and having very suicidal thoughts. And it was just genuinely not a good time. But it wasn't really until I joined high school that I was sort of exposed to a bit more diversity of thought and was sort of introduced to advocacy that I really stepped out of my comfort zone and took on that sort of role to say, okay, I'm looking at all of these girls who are across the world and seeing that they have massive issues and that they're still fighting for their own rights. And here I am sort of wallowing in self-pity. So if I am going to be an activist, if I'm going to be an activist, I have to find confidence within myself and sort of be alongside these girls to help uplift themselves and spread change throughout the world.
I can definitely say you are a strong woman, Rebecca. With all of the hardships you had gone through, you've definitely used these as learning curves to only get stronger and to find yourself. I want to touch upon this self-discovery phase that you said you went through. What are a few of the things that you did find out about yourself, and how long do you think it took for you to realise you had all of these amazing things buried deep inside of you that took such a long time to find?
Within my own self-discovery, I found out quite a few things about myself and like what are my triggers, what really makes me happy and what makes me stressed and how I handle it. And it's been incredibly beneficial. It's saddening that I've had to, go through such a tough time to sort of have that sort of self-realization. But it's been especially beneficial, especially going into college, noticing, okay, I'm very stressed. This is what I'm going to do to sort of take my mind off of it.
How have you changed since this person that you found out that you were? How have all of these learning curves helped you become the person you are today?
They definitely still affect me. I mean, I'm still a pretty shy person. It may not seem like it, but I do have quite a few anxieties going into, massive speaking events or like going to speak to other girls. But these events have made me realize, okay, if there are millions of girls out there who are literally fighting against, stigma and discrimination, tomatoes are being thrown their way and they're still going, a little bit of anxiety can't stop me. And it's really allowed me to sort of blossom into this beautiful person where it's like, okay, I understand that I am struggling with anxiety and I understand that I struggle sometimes with depression and focus, but it's okay. And that makes me a better person. And it allows me to reach other people who are experiencing the same issues and sort of have that deeper connection. Especially, being vulnerable with other people is so difficult for some people, myself included. But I think being vulnerable is the way that we can only really inspire change, because there are so many topics that are very taboo or are very difficult to talk about. So sort of getting in that place where it's a constant safe space is so important. And being able to be vulnerable and put yourself in uncomfortable situations is necessary to being a good activist.
I knew, Rebecca, before I started this talk with you that I was going to start feeling emotional and I was going to feel transformed. And I see different sides of you now, that I've heard of a story about your past that I had never known of before. I'm so appreciative of you coming on and sharing it with us, because I know your story is one that many people listening will be able to resonate with, going from someone who is shy to having hardships and overcoming them. And although you still describe yourself as a shy girl now, I can tell you that you are confident in ways you might not envision at the moment. And for this, I'm so proud of you, and I'm so thankful that you are speaking here. You've touched upon becoming an activist, and you talk about these opportunities and events that you've attended. What were these opportunities and what were these events? How have they helped you become this activist and this version of yourself that you now are?
Well, I can tell you my first major event was actually featuring Malala, which is definitely a New York experience for sure. She was receiving an award at the United Nations, and Girl Up extended the invitation to clubs throughout New York City, and I sort of got introduced to the staff, and that was my first Girl Up event, and that was literally like once in a lifetime thing to see and meet Malala. And I realize now what a privilege it is. But, I definitely took on from my mom's statement that any opportunity that comes your way, you have to sort of grab it and don't let it go. But I've sort of realized now, especially being involved in advocacy for so long and seeing how things have changed and seeing how there's so many discrepancies and so many inequalities, that while I would love to grasp every opportunity that comes my way, sometimes I have to step back and acknowledge my privilege and sort of say, I am not the best person at this, but I do know somebody who is perfect. So especially we've seen this with the Black Lives Matter movement. While I would love to go on every single podcast and every single TV show and talk about it, I am in no way an expert on discrimination and inequality. So, setting it aside and sort of giving it to my other colleagues who unfortunately have gone through discrimination is important. And it's necessary to do that as a leader. There's a little echo.
It's okay.
But being in New York is definitely a privilege. Once again, it's expensive to live here, but you are exposed to such a beautiful world that I don't think you're able to experience in many other places. Maybe like London and maybe California, but that's it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I understand where you come from by saying you wish you could be on every podcast and every news show to speak about these matters. You don't feel have enough light shed upon them. This has obviously taken you finding your voice to talk on such platforms, and I know if given an opportunity, you would take it. However, you don't feel like you are the person most well versed on these subjects. In regards to finding your voice, what was the process to being able to find this voice that you now have to speak on platforms about global issues and social injustices?
I think it was tough. I was definitely doing it at the beginning, but looking back, I realized how uneducated I was. And I don't want to say uneducated, I was still a kid, wasn't completely exposed, but I was also not completely secure with myself. I was still figuring out my own identity in terms of who I liked, who I didn't like, what I liked, and, especially I struggled a lot with my Latina identity. I grew up in a household that was very Americanized and we didn't speak Spanish. And I automatically assumed that made me less than. And that was definitely difficult, especially stepping into the activist world where you see so many different people of color. And I'm kind of like, okay, I'm Latina, but I can't communicate with these people as well. So it was difficult for sure. But I think, let's see, how can I phrase this? Can you repeat the question just so I can steer this in the right direction?
Of course. I'll take away all of the sugarcoating. How have you found your voice? What path did you lead to finding your voice?
I think, definitely the Teen Advisor program helped a lot in finding my own identity. I struggled tremendously with imposter syndrome, especially throughout the beginning of advocacy. Because like I said, you see so many people and people of color in these spaces who are so secure with themselves, and in yourself, okay, I'm kind of insecure. So definitely being around a space where girls who equally felt like they didn't belong there, but also knew that they belonged there was interesting, because we could sort of have those conversations that not many other activists and not many public officials and celebrities talk about. where they're like, did I deserve this? Do I deserve this power, this platform that I've been given? And it was definitely until I was the co-chair for the teen advisor class after my first tenure that I realized, okay, this is a thing that a lot of people go through. How do I identify my own identity? And communicating with people, especially with people who come from Latin America and people who identify as Latinx, it was important to realize, there are so many different types of Latinx people that there's no definition of what it takes to be a good Latin person. So definitely figuring that out. And then in terms of, overcoming a lot of my obstacles that I faced, it was definitely a game of cat and mouse where it's like, okay, I think I figured it out. And then realizing, oh, maybe I didn't completely figure this out, and sort of continually growing. And as I evolve, I'm still asking myself questions. And I think it's okay if you don't completely know yourself and you don't know your complete identity yet. And I don't think you ever will, because you're consistently evolving, you're consistently learning new things. Just, you have to continually remember, okay, is what I'm doing right? Is what I'm doing going to affect me later in life, with the universe? Is it going to be karma, etc.? Am I doing the right thing? And I think that's the most important thing. And being secure with yourself, not necessarily your identity, but in the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I completely agree with many of the points you've touched upon. Your imposter syndrome feeling, which I think so many people are able to say that they have gone through a period of time where they have felt as if they were going through imposter syndrome. This is something that many people do go through. Many people aren't able to overcome this feeling. With your not being able to speak Spanish in a Latina background, however, your family has been Americanized to a sense, there's that lack of relatability within the people you would call, I suppose, your own and your family. That starting from home makes it a lot more difficult to then step outside and be in different environments and to feel as involved and as a part of that community. I definitely understand where you're coming from there. And I also feel as if over this whole transition, as you do understand more about yourself, as you perfectly said, there is no specific route to finding your voice and there's no specific way to finding you, and you won't, because you consistently evolve and you change and you learn more and more about yourself each and every day. I want to ask, Rebecca, what's the most recent aspect of yourself that you have recently seen change, or you've recently learnt something new about?
I think that's a difficult question. There are so many things. I think most recently in starting college, I realized how important education is. And I'm currently taking a feminist class in college. And I'm learning so many things that I didn't even know within the activist space, especially within like pay gap and pay equity, and how there are so many discrepancies. White women make 72 cents to the man's dollar, but Hispanic women and Black women make less. But then also finding out that there are inequalities within that Puerto Rican women make more than Central American women. And I think that it's such an interesting topic to talk about. And it's not only made me feel more proud to be a Latina, but it's also made me more aware of my privileges that I have. I think that's definitely a thing, realizing that college in itself is such a privilege, and that I'm doing a lot more than what some of my family members are doing. And sort of acknowledging, okay, if I have this privilege, I'm going to definitely use it and bring it back to my community, and use it not only to uplift my own educational value, but uplift like Nicaragua's educational value by advocating for them, or other Latin American and other countries around the world. And I think I've definitely had an epiphany within my Latina culture, but also being more angry and realizing it's okay to be angry, especially with US politics as we are slowly reaching the election. And, there are so many things that are happening daily. Previously, I was scared to sort of speak out about politics in fear that, people will come into my DMs and have these arguments. And then I sort of realized people are going to have these arguments whether or not I'm political or not. And it's okay to be an activist and have a political opinion. And I think that was definitely a major thing. And now that I have so much evidence and education to continually back it up, just being more confident in that.
It's lovely to see how, as you are receiving education, you are continually educating others. And we can see this in the form of your creation of this beautiful social outlet, the Buzzcut Post. I'd love if you can touch upon what it is you're doing to educate others as you're learning more and more every day, speaking up about these matters in society. How are you able to translate everything that you were learning onto your blog and onto this post?
Well, I first started the Buzzcut Post to specifically tap into my journalism aspect. I've always wanted to become a journalist. So doing something that's sort of related in that aspect was definitely important to me. So I created this platform just kind of to test the waters and see how good I was at it. But especially now entering college, I realized how important and how there is such a lack of education, because it is a privilege to go to college. And, sitting in my classes at home, my mom has come up to me and been like, can I just sit in on one of your classes and, listen? And I asked her why, and she's like, she's never been given that opportunity to tap into this education and tap into this knowledge. The Buzzcut Post is still pretty fresh. It's pretty new. It's definitely changed since the beginning. And I'm hoping that as I continually educate myself, I can continually educate other people, give them these resources, especially in light of COVID. There have been so many inequalities that have been dug up, and so many systematic systems of oppression that have been unearthed. Educating other people on this is what's happening, and this is why it's been happening, and it's been happening for years. It's been shocking to people, but it's also been eye-opening and saying, okay, it's not completely my fault. It is the fault of a government system that has continually oppressed me. I think that more news outlets and more organizations need to do that, tap into other people's potential and say, you don't necessarily need a college degree to be a great activist or to be a good person. You can still, especially with social media and with the internet, you can educate yourself completely free of charge and still be one of the smartest people in the room without a bachelor's degree.
You're not wrong there whatsoever. We see many people not do the typical university route, getting their degree and still being very educated and able to make impacts in this world in other forms. Sometimes maybe it is via an academic route, but not the typical one. I will say, Rebecca, that I love hearing your mums want to sit in during your lectures and to hear about what's going on, because it's never out of fashion to gain knowledge. There's never a time to stop learning and to stop educating yourself. And I think that it's really beautiful to see that although she's many years older than you, and although she has a title of a mum, she's still able to share that she's willing to learn and she wants to learn, because she did not get this opportunity, this privilege that we now have. I really liked hearing about that, so thank you. I do want to know that although the Buzzcut Post is something quite new, what's the difference between your most recent post and your first post? What were they, in fact? What was your first post and what was your most recent post? And how do you think that you've evolved and changed in terms of what it is that you talk about?
My first post was actually about BTS. How they've been, involved in UNICEF and education. And my most recent post was about getting cops out of American schools. And that has drastically changed. It may not seem like it, but it has, especially in terms of writing style. When I first did the BTS article, I took on a very neutral position. I was like, this is just going to be a piece of information, no opinion attached. And now the most recent post, it is completely opinionated and, it's giving you facts, but it's also saying, this is my experience. And sort of honing in on that has definitely been a new thing. And I definitely want to try it. It's definitely brought up a lot of controversy. There have been people in the DM saying, this is ridiculous, you shouldn't do this. But it's allowed people to sort of open their minds a little bit and see different perspectives. Because I realize now, throwing facts, it is important to, have evidence and have facts. But if you don't bring that opinion aspect into things, people can never really see a different side or a different perspective and develop their own opinions. And I noticed this especially when reading a lot of news articles. I have a lot of facts, but I don't really know, there was no guide into the direction of whether or not I should agree with this or disagree. It was sort of like, this is just facts. Having my own opinion saying, this is what I believe, and you're kind of reading it and you're like, I agree with this, but I disagree with that. It allows a person to think a little bit more and digest the information better, at least for me personally. But I found a lot of people who have read the articles have come up to me and had discussions about it, which is something completely different than when I was uploading the first few articles for Buzzcut Post, because it was all just neutrality and information. Hopefully I will continue with this route, but like I said, it's ever evolving, and so am I. So it might change in a year or two.
And there is no pressure to stay the same. You might change in the next year or two. I certainly do hope that you keep Buzzcut Post, because I love reading these articles, and anyone listening should definitely sign up. I've subscribed. I'm waiting for the next post to come up, Rebecca.
It's going to take some time. Full-time college student definitely takes up a lot of time.
I can imagine. Don't worry, take it as it goes, but just know I'm waiting. Considering you do have all of the sliding of DMs and all of this feedback from people with your following and people who read your articles, do you feel that this social media presence has made it that you are effectively able to reach more youth?
For sure. I think the majority of my followers are probably under the age of 24, and they stem from mainly the United States, but they come from all over the world. And while I don't have necessarily a major following, I think it's important that even if you have 10 followers or 10K followers, that you are speaking to a group of people that you could possibly influence, especially if you are a kid who probably shouldn't be on social media because you're like 10 or 12. But I was on social media when I was like 8. So I completely understand it. Don't tell Twitter I said that. I think that it doesn't matter about your following count, just knowing that you have people who you are reaching and that everything that you post on the internet stays on the internet. And I have definitely made a couple of mistakes at the very beginning of when the internet was sort of developing. And I'm lucky that I haven't made too many mistakes as the internet has sort of reached its peak. But just know that it doesn't matter about follow ratio and how many likes you get and how many people save your post or send it. Know that it's okay to speak your mind. You're going to reach someone. Whether or not you're reaching 100 people or just one of your classmates, it's important because that person could go on to tell their friends or tell their parents what they saw in your Instagram post. And I think now social media has made it so easy to get information out that it has sort of been a blessing in a way, because I'm learning about, things that are happening in Nigeria, in Lebanon, in Colombia, and Brazil that you don't hear in mainstream media, and sort of being exposed to a lot of people through the internet who come from these places also is important, because you may just, have the information, but being able to reach out to someone who's in Lebanon and say, hey, are you doing okay? What's happening is different because it's just a conversation, but you're still learning and you have sort of a personal connection now. So you want to continue to advocate for places outside of your own home. Social media has definitely been a negative space. Like I said, people sliding into your DMs saying mean things about you. But I think it's important to prioritize your mental health and sort of set aside those people who are bad-mouthing you, because I found that if you reach out to them after they said something mean and say, I'm not really in the right mental space to have this conversation with you, they sort of empathize a little bit and they're like, oh wait, there's a person at the other end of this. Maybe I should take a different approach.
You've touched upon so many things that I think are extremely important in regards to social media. Reiterating that you said whatever you post, it remains there forever. That is one thing that at the beginning of this whole social media era, people took for granted or they were unaware of, but now it's a lot of retrieving, oh, but you said this back then and you said that comment, how do you stand? That was also a very important concept that people tended to realise a bit later on, and it's coming back to haunt them because of remarks that might have not been thought through properly. However, there are lots of people who are able to voice their opinions on social media, and they do this unapologetically, which gives them a stance to then go on and say, well, I've always felt this way and I will continue to think about this. In terms of saying that no matter how large or small your following is, the people who you do have on your platform are people you can reach. You sat down with your dad and you've had conversations with him on NADA about the impact of social media and having this talk with your teen on what social media is able to do for you and the precautions that you need to follow when a child is on social media. The title in itself, this talk that you need to have with your teen, it's already implying that it's a one-way conversation and it's your parents telling you to be careful. But I want to hear from you. Although, unfortunately, social media has so many negative impacts, it creates a space for us to post so many things and to educate so many people and to reach people on other ends of the world. Why do you think social media is an amazing space for teenagers and for anyone of any age to learn and to actively make impacts globally?
I think that it really doesn't matter how old you are. You can, like you said, you can always learn. We saw it with my mom, like coming into the college lectures. And I think that social media has definitely given so many different perspectives and, seeing how involved the young people have been. My dad has a Instagram and he just recently got TikTok, but he has been exposed, to living with a teenager already, but sort of seeing how teenagers react to different news in different states and different countries has been educational to him. And I think that if you're going to be on social media, you can definitely learn, but it's also dependent completely on the person, because I have friends and I know older people who are on social media who have that access to education and consistently learning, but they choose not to. They choose to keep their feed to be off of politics or off of world events. They just want to see like cool stuff that's happening within their neighborhood, or like skating videos. So I think it doesn't matter on the age. It's just completely dependent on the person and whether or not they want to consistently educate themselves. But I think that also with, things such as the Discover page and, your For You page, it forces you to sort of say, this is what's happening. You can either skip or watch it, but there's no excuse for you not to be educated anymore. And I think, my mom is the person who's probably the least tech savvy in the house. And even she goes on Instagram and she's like, look at what I saw, what's happening in Nigeria. And I'm like, you know what's happening in Nigeria? I'm kind of shocked. It's definitely been a blessing for every generation. And I hope that more of the older generation gets involved in social media, but gets involved with an open mind. Because we have definitely seen on Twitter where, 50 and 60-year-olds will come at 13-year-old activists and say, you don't know what you're talking about. And it's like, yeah, I don't, because I'm 13. I'm still learning. I haven't been exposed to the world completely yet, but at least I'm trying. That's the most important thing about social media. And I know we've seen with like cancel culture, how people have obviously made mistakes, but it's dependent on whether or not you're trying to fix those mistakes and constantly better yourself, or whether or not you are ignoring it and remaining ignorant, because there really is no excuse for you to remain ignorant anymore, especially with social media.
We're given many, many opportunities to learn and to find out the best way to express yourselves, so ignorance is no longer an excuse, unfortunately. I will say that with the examples of 50-year-olds coming at 14, 15-year-olds, there is a massive gap, and there's that massive gap in terms of knowledge and understanding. And you're a brilliant example of this younger generation blatantly saying, well, yeah, I've tried to voice my opinion, but I don't know that much about what I'm talking about. And what I love is your position at Gauchos for transparency helps people who are unaware how to use their voice and who might feel like they're being ignored to speak up on matters and to help them. Can you just explain a bit more about what it is that the Gauchos for Transparency movement and initiative aims to do in such circumstances?
So Gauchos for Transparency is an organization within the college I'm attending, UC Santa Barbara, to sort of shed a light on issues that are happening within the school, as well as talk about, there are major topics that are happening globally, such as Black Lives Matter, sterilization of women in camps, sort of shedding light on those topics, but also connecting them back to either racist rhetoric that might have happened at the school, and sort of saying, these things are happening in a school that you're paying to attend, and, a very liberal school in a very liberal state. There still is a lot of issues happening under its roof. And, as a first year, I joined the organization fairly early simply to not only shed a light on what's happening in UC Santa Barbara, but also to become more acquainted with the school environment. Because, like I said, I was going into the school saying this is a very liberal school. It's in California. I'm assuming that everybody is kind of going to be on the same page as me. And that's not true. There is still a lot of inequality and inequity within the school. And, the whole Gauchos mascot thing, and follow up on their legacy and what they've left behind in the school.
It's amazing to hear that just as a first year, Rebecca, you're getting so much done. And I just want to hone in on the fact that you are a first year. This will be the first time you cast a ballot. You are going to vote, and it's election time. What does this responsibility mean to you?
It is definitely a large weight. I will say that for sure, because I have plenty of family who don't have the privilege to vote, and sort of, casting this ballot as a voice for myself, but also as a vote for, the rest of my family and those who are underage. I remember in 2016 when President Trump was first elected, I was 14, so I couldn't vote. And I just remember being extremely angry that like 50% of the population did not vote, because I couldn't vote simply because I was just too young, and saying, how could you, a person who has the ability to go out and vote, waste it and not use that privilege for other people who don't have that privilege? We've seen it with people who, can't vote because they were previous felons, or, they're underage, or they're not citizens. This election is not only of great importance within the United States, but it's also of great importance globally, because it can show how powerful elections are. And, America is seen as this very democratic state, that we have fair and free elections. But if 50% of the population is not voting, how is it fair and free? So I think, especially also because it's the 100th year anniversary of the 19th Amendment, and being a woman who has been given that privilege to vote because of things like the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and because of the 19th Amendment, it's important to acknowledge the people who came before me, who fought so diligently to give me this right, but also to continue voting to keep this right. Because we've seen that there are people in power who are attempting to suppress voters and oppress people of color from voting and changing things. And it's important to use my white privilege and my young privilege to go out and vote for these people to ensure that they continue to have their rights protected.
You are definitely going out at the moment to tell people that they need to vote. I know recently you and your peers have had stands, and you are encouraging people to go and vote because you understand that this is a privilege and it's an important responsibility that everyone who has the opportunity to vote should take. One vote can be the difference between whoever is cast as president. It's that one vote that could change everything. Although it might seem as if you don't have much say in this, it's the collective, in that when everyone comes together, you are able to make important decisions that do go on to affect. While at that stage you were only 14, and it has affected you since age 14 to 18. Those 4 years since you were able to before you were able to cast a vote, your lives and the lives of people who are unable to vote, even the lives of people who were able to vote, they are changed by the outcome of the vote, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So, very, very long bits, but I got there at the end. I will say, Becca, that when you speak, and which is one of the reasons I was so happy to have you on, when you speak, the world should just stop and listen, because there's this elegance in your voice and you speak with such compassion, and you were someone who, if I saw on the street, I would misconstrue you as someone who was always happy and really good all the time. But hearing about your hardships and hearing about how these things have shaped you become the person you are today, I'm honestly proud to know you and to know all of the amazing things you've done and all of the change that has come across personally with you and yourself, and all of the change that you have able to make to people's lives who surround themselves by you. I'm just so happy that we are, through many different ways, able to turn our weaknesses into strengths. And not only am I happy to hear of your journey to understanding yourself a bit more, taking the initiative to be your own therapist and your own sort of cheerleader. You were very mature at a young age, and to get these things done is commendable. I do hope that you take this into consideration and not be too hard on yourself when I do ask that you write your letter to self, which is now, actually. So please, take it away, Rebecca.
Well, I have to say, you are so incredible. First of all, for starting a podcast at such a young age, even now, I'm like, damn, I can't do that. But just being a voice for change and sort of bringing this British elegance that already comes from the accent, but just having this educational perspective and this knowledge, you're so wise beyond your years. And I'm so glad that you're starting podcasts to not only expose your fellow peers to different perspectives, but also to sort of showcase how smart you are. Because you're so intelligent. And I may seem intelligent, but I promise it's all just the top layer. I have definitely had my dumb moments. But you're just so incredible.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you so much. I would love if you took the time to think about it. Take your time, think about it, and when you're ready, do write your letter to self, and I'll just wallow in that awesomeness and that hype that you've just given me.
A letter to self. See. Okay. Dear me. Hi. How are you? I'm doing great right now. I hope that you are not stressed because you have midterms this week and that you're relaxing. But also that you are consistently giving yourself self-love. This quarantine has been hard on you. This quarantine has been hard on everybody. So it is okay to cry every once in a while, even though people may tell you it's not. And it is okay to be sad of the things that you might have lost and the opportunities that you might have given up. But you have to look at yourself in the mirror every day and just know that there is a person who loves you, and that's you. It may not seem like it at the moment. And Mofi. It may not seem like it at the moment, and you may feel very empty and lonely. But at the end of the day, you are always with yourself, and you're always there for yourself. You're the biggest cheerleader anybody could have. Be there for yourself and know that it is okay to have your off days. And it is okay to make mistakes and think about some of the awkward things that you did at 3 a.m. in the morning. It is all fine. These hiccups will lead you to a better place, and it'll lead you to be a better person. And I know that you can continue to inspire change for others. And if you get yelled at by your mom, just know it's from a place of love. Even though it may not seem like it at the time, she does love you sometimes. So yeah, continue to love yourself. Everything is going to be okay. And even if the election, I don't know how it's going to go, even if the election does not go your way, know that you have to fight and continually fight, even if it does go your way. The burnout will be real, but you just got to keep pushing. Yours truly, Becca.
That was beautiful, Rebecca. And I hope that you do look back at this letter in periods of time, maybe next year, reflect and see if you were able to stick to being true to yourself. I will certainly remind you, and I will also remind your mum to not shout at you as much, but she definitely does do it from a place of love. This has been fun. This has been transformative for me. I feel as if I've learnt more about you, and hopefully our listeners have not only learnt more about you, but the path that you will continue to lead, educating yourself and educating others, advocating for social injustices and things that aren't right, using your voice and using your platform. But first things first, finding out more about who you are. That's the most important. Thank you so much for coming on. I've loved this talk. I think this is selfishly a talk for me and not for my listeners.
Not for your listeners, it's just for you. At 3 a.m. when you're like, damn it, I didn't do homework. Let me just listen to this podcast real quick.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Becca, and I hope to have you on again for sure at some point in the near future.
Hopefully we have a future. But thank you so much for having me. This has not only been incredibly self-reflective, but it's allowed me to get to know you better and just see your elegance and your future. I already know that the future is going to be so bright for you, and that this podcast and that your work is just going to go miles beyond what you may think it will now.
Thank you so much. And I think we're done.
I think we're done.